The cork popped so loudly I flinched. For a second, I thought it was the beep of the hospital monitor back in my daughter's room, that frantic, uneven sound that made my heart drop every time the nurses rushed in. But no. This was the sound of celebration, not survival. Laughter followed, glasses clinked and golden bubbles spilled over the rim onto white tablecloths. And there I sat holding my water glass, smiling like I belonged. If you've ever been betrayed by the ones you trusted most, this story will hit home. Don't miss a second. Watch until the end to feel the full power of this revenge. Inside I was screaming. I kept my eyes steady on the chandelier above, the crystals catching the light like frozen tears. Everyone around me was glowing. My brother in his new tuxedo, his bride shimmering in lace, my parents beaming as though this night had cost them nothing. But I knew the truth. I knew the price tag down to the dollar. $280,000. Not from their savings. Not from some miracle windfall. From my husband's life insurance. His last gift to us. And while they toasted to new beginnings, my daughter was lying in a hospital bed, fighting for air with every shallow breath. She needed surgery. She needed me. And she needed the money that was being poured into champagne flutes at that very moment. I took a sip of water, cool against my tongue, and forced my hands to stop trembling. If I gave myself away, if I broke down in front of them now, I'd lose more than just pride. I'd lose the small edge I still had. Because they didn't know. They didn't know what I had been keeping quietly, what I had tucked away like sharp knives hidden behind silk. It was 7:42 p.m. The banquet hall smelled of roses and roasted chicken, candles flickering low as the music swelled. My mother dabbed at her lipstick with a napkin and leaned across the table. "You look tired," she said, her tone more accusation than concern. "Try to smile for the photos." I smiled. Oh, I smiled so wide my cheeks ached. Of course. Her eyes slid past me as though I were an empty chair, settling back on the bride, her prize. The young woman laughed, holding up her diamond necklace for friends to admire. I recognized it. I had seen the invoice crumpled in my father's study weeks before. 48,000. Paid in cash. My daughter's hospital bills sat unpaid on my kitchen counter, every overdue notice stamped in red. I cut the chicken on my plate into neat squares, though I had no appetite. Each slice was deliberate, mechanical, the way I'd been living lately, one day at a time, one crisis at a time. I caught my brother glancing at me across the table. He smirked, almost as if daring me to say something. He knew too. He had signed some of those checks himself. But he wasn't ashamed. No, he looked proud. Proud that the spotlight was on him, that he was the golden son, the reason our family had gathered in glittering clothes. I looked back down at my plate. My fork slipped. A piece of chicken fell, splattering sauce on the edge of the white cloth. The tiny mess made my heart pound faster than it should have. Maybe it was because I knew this whole night was one big mess that couldn't be scrubbed clean. A waitress leaned close, whispering politely, "Would you like another drink, ma'am?" "No," I said too quickly, then softened my voice. "No thank you. I'm fine." Fine. That word I'd been saying for months. To the doctors, to the social worker, to my daughter who asked me if everything would be okay. Fine. A lie wrapped in a single syllable. The band started playing louder, a swing tune, the kind my husband used to hum while fixing the fence in our backyard. The memory hit like a blow and I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles burned. He had worked himself sick so that if anything happened, his little girl would be safe. He had signed that policy not knowing he was signing away his last breath. I could still picture the way he kissed our daughter's forehead when he got the papers in the mail. "This is for her," he had said. "Always for her." And here it was. For her. For us. Except it wasn't. It had been stolen, turned into champagne, chandeliers, and a spectacle of selfishness. I excused myself and stepped outside for air. The night was cold, sharp with winter's edge, and I could see my breath curl like smoke. In the parking lot, cars glittered under the streetlights. Sleek rentals lined up like trophies. I pulled my coat tighter and leaned against the wall. My phone buzzed. A message from the hospital. Just a reminder about the balance due. As if I needed reminding. I typed back quickly, promising I'd find a way. That phrase again. Always that phrase. Behind me, through the glass, I could see them. My parents laughing, clapping as my brother raised another toast. My mother's pearls caught the light. My father's hand rested proudly on his son's shoulder. I clenched my jaw until it hurt. They thought I was helpless. They thought grief had drained me, that desperation had broken me. And maybe it had for a while. But now I felt something steadier, colder. They didn't know the folders I had stacked at home, the documents I'd collected quietly, page by page, like someone knitting a net. They didn't know I'd been paying attention. And they certainly didn't know what I planned to do with it. When I returned inside, the music had slowed. Couples were dancing, swaying under soft lights. My father was at the head table, his voice booming as he told a story about my brother's childhood. Everyone laughed at the right moments, clapping as if rehearsed. I stood in the corner watching. My pulse steadied. The sight of them, so sure, so smug, no longer hollowed me out. Instead, it sharpened me. I could almost taste the moment when all of this would come crashing down, though I didn't let it show. I walked back to my seat, slid into the chair, and folded my napkin neatly on my lap. "Everything all right?" my mother asked, her tone clipped, suspicious. I met her gaze, steady and calm. "Perfect," I said. She tilted her head, frowning slightly, but I didn't look away. I wanted her to see something in my eyes. Not the daughter she thought she could control, but something else. Something she didn't yet understand. My brother raised his glass again. "To family," he shouted. I raised mine too, water still in it, clear and cold. "To family," I echoed. But in my mind I wasn't toasting to them. I was toasting to the storm that was already brewing, the one they couldn't see, the one they had created with their own greed. The hall erupted in cheers again. The band picked up a faster tune. My parents leaned in for a photo, smiling as though the world belonged to them. I smiled too. White, calm, patient. Because I knew something they didn't. And soon they would know it too. I kept smiling at their toast, the glass of water cool in my hand, but inside my mind was already at work. By the time the night ended, by the time the lights dimmed and the music faded, I knew what I had to do. And unlike them, I wouldn't be sloppy. I wouldn't waste. Every move from now on would be deliberate. Careful. Quiet. When I slipped off my heels at the door of my small house later that night, I didn't cry. That part of me was gone. I hung my coat, set my purse down, and went straight to the drawer by the kitchen counter. Inside it was a manila folder that had grown thicker each week. I laid it flat on the table and opened it. Pages spread like wings. Receipts, statements, little scraps that seemed meaningless on their own. But together they told a story. Their story. The necklace invoice, the catering bill, a florist order nearly as high as a year's rent. Each paper smelled faintly of ink and paper dust. I touched the corner of one receipt and felt a tremor of something new, not grief this time but power. In the mornings I became someone else. On the outside I was the tired mother driving back and forth to the hospital, waiting in plastic chairs, nodding politely at nurses. But inside, I was an investigator. One afternoon I stopped by my parents' house under the excuse of returning a casserole dish. My mother fussed over me at the door, barely looking up from her phone, muttering something about appointments. I stepped inside, my heart steady, my smile fixed. On the desk by the hallway, papers were stacked carelessly. I brushed my hand across them as though straightening the pile, but my eyes caught what I needed: an insurance withdrawal slip. I didn't take it, not yet. I just noted the date, the amount, the signature. I'd come back for it later when no one would notice. "Don't stay too long," my mother said without looking up. "We're busy." Busy spending what wasn't theirs. I left with the casserole dish, but more importantly with another piece of the puzzle. At night, when my daughter finally drifted off to sleep, I worked at the kitchen table. The hum of the refrigerator was my only companion. I clipped receipts to sheets of paper, lined them up in plastic sleeves, labeled dates in neat black pen. My hands moved with precision, though sometimes they shook from exhaustion. Each page I slipped into the binder made me feel steadier. It was like building a house of cards, one layer balanced on the next. Fragile, yes. One wrong move could topple it all. But if I built carefully enough, it could stand tall enough to bury them. My daughter stirred in her bed one night, coughing. I hurried to her, smoothing her hair, whispering that everything would be all right. She looked up at me with sleepy eyes and asked, "Did Daddy leave us safe?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Yes, sweetheart," I whispered. "He did." And I went back to my binder, more determined than ever to make that promise true. Sometimes the evidence came to me in ways I didn't expect. At the grocery store one Saturday, I overheard two women gossiping in the next aisle. "Can you believe the Bennetts?" one whispered. That wedding must have cost a fortune. Heard they paid cash for everything. I turned the corner and pretended to examine a can of beans. My face stayed neutral but inside I burned. Their gossip wasn't proof but it confirmed what I already knew. People had noticed. And the more they noticed, the harder it would be for my parents to hide. I bought the beans, unnecessary as they were, just to keep up appearances, and drove home with another kind of note in my head. Community suspicion. Another card in my house. Then came the jewelry store. I stopped in one morning under the pretense of fixing a broken clasp on my necklace. The jeweler, a chatty man in his 60s, recognized my last name immediately. "Ah, the Bennetts. Your parents bought that fine diamond set for the wedding. Paid in full, of course. Beautiful pieces. Must have been a special occasion." My smile didn't falter. "Yes," I said softly, "a very special occasion." While he worked on my clasp, I glanced discreetly at his ledger on the counter. There it was, a neat line with my father's signature beside a staggering amount. I memorized the date, the figures, and even the ink color. When I left, I thanked him kindly, but my mind was already racing. That night, I jotted it all down, pressing the pen so hard the paper nearly tore. Another brick in the wall. Another secret they didn't know I had. But it wasn't just receipts and invoices. No, the cracks in their house of lies went deeper. My brother's new wife, proud and careless, gave me more than she realized. At a family dinner weeks later, she bragged about her designer shoes, laughing about how my father insisted she deserved the best. "They said it was from the wedding fund," she giggled, sipping wine. "Wedding fund." My jaw tightened, but I forced a laugh too. "He does spoil you," I said lightly. What she didn't notice was the way I tucked her words away like a sharp blade. Spoken admissions, even in jest, carried weight. And if she could boast once, she could boast again. All I had to do was listen. I wasn't reckless. I didn't let my anger show. If anything, I became quieter around them, more compliant, the dutiful daughter who asked no questions. It lulled them into thinking I was harmless, that I had surrendered. But behind closed doors my binder thickened. I labeled tabs: jewelry, catering, insurance withdrawals, cash transactions. Each category told the same story: theft, greed, betrayal. And still I wasn't done. One late afternoon, after another long hospital visit, I stopped at the insurance office. I told the clerk I needed to verify some details for my records. She pulled up the file with a click of her keyboard. Her voice was cheerful, routine. "Yes, the payout was processed last spring. Direct deposit into your parents' joint account." She handed me a copy before I even had to ask. "Standard practice," she said. I held the paper with both hands, the numbers glaring up at me in black and white. Proof. Unarguable, undeniable proof. Walking back to my car, I tucked the paper into my purse and sat for a long moment, hands trembling, heart pounding. For the first time in months, I let myself smile. By the end of that winter, my binder was heavy, almost bursting from the weight of everything inside. Each time I closed it, the snap of the rings echoed in the quiet house like a promise. So I kept it hidden. I slid it under the loose floorboard in my bedroom, covering it with a rug. No one would find it there. Not my parents, not my brother, not even my daughter. Because this wasn't ready to be revealed. Not yet. A house of cards must be built high enough before you flick it, or the fall won't be worth the effort. And I was nowhere near finished. At the next family dinner, my mother smiled at me over the table. "You seem calmer these days," she said, as if pleased with herself. "I found my way," I replied softly, meeting her eyes without blinking. She smiled, satisfied, and turned back to her plate. But if she had looked longer, if she had searched my face, she might have seen it. The quiet storm building behind my calm. The house of cards was nearly ready. And when it fell, it would bury them all. I closed the floorboard over the binder that night and pressed the rug back into place. My mother's words still echoed in my ears. "You seem calmer these days." She thought I had finally surrendered. She thought her power over me was complete. She had no idea the calm she saw was only the surface. Beneath it, the storm had already begun. It didn't take long for their pride to do the work for me. The higher they lifted their chins, the more they exposed their throats. At Sunday service, my father strutted down the aisle as if he were a king. He shook hands, patted backs, and spoke louder than the pastor himself. Everyone knew about the wedding. He made sure of it. "Nothing but the best for my boy," he said to the man in the next pew. His voice carried strong enough for half the congregation to hear. Every penny well spent. It's what family deserves. I lowered my eyes to my hymnal, but inside, my heart tightened with something that was no longer grief. It was focus. Every careless word, every proud boast, it all became part of the record. I didn't need to say a thing. They were writing their own downfall with every brag. After service, I walked my daughter to the car, wrapping her scarf tighter against the wind. My mother caught up to me, her perfume sharp and cloying. "You've been quiet," she remarked, glancing at me with that same faint suspicion she always wore. I adjusted my daughter's scarf and smiled. I listened better that way. She gave a small laugh, mistaking it for self-deprecation. But it wasn't. It was a promise she didn't hear. The first real crack came not from me but from them. A neighbor, Mrs. Carter, stopped me one afternoon outside the pharmacy. Her voice was gentle, but her words cut deep. "Your parents are so generous," she said. "They told me they covered the entire wedding themselves. You must be proud to come from such a giving family." I felt my throat tighten, but I nodded politely. "Yes," I managed, "they do love to celebrate." She smiled, oblivious, and walked away. Giving family. That's how they spun it. Not thieves. Not selfish. Generous. And the world, at least on the surface, believed it. But I knew better. And if Mrs. Carter knew, others knew too. Pride doesn't stay quiet. Pride spreads like smoke. That night I opened the binder again. I added a new tab, witnesses. I wrote Mrs. Carter's name in neat script. Not because I wanted to drag her into this, but because her words proved something I needed. My parents weren't hiding. They weren't covering their tracks. They were bragging in public. The arrogance that blinded them would be the rope that hung them. My brother was the easiest to read. One evening he invited me to his new home, the house they claimed he and his wife had saved for. I went, carrying a store-bought pie as though I were just another guest. The place reeked of fresh paint and new carpets, the air heavy with that chemical scent of brand new money. My brother gave me a tour, his chest puffed out, pointing to every polished surface as though he had built it with his own hands. "Not bad, huh?" he said, grinning. "All ours." His wife trailed behind, showing off a gold bracelet I hadn't seen before. I smiled politely. "It's beautiful." But my eyes lingered on the mortgage papers stacked carelessly on the counter. I didn't touch them, not yet. I didn't need to. The dates, the numbers, the lender's name were all visible from where I stood. I memorized what I could, locked it away in my mind. Later, as I cut a slice of pie, I asked lightly, "It must have been a lot, furnishing this place so quickly." He laughed, biting into his fork. "You could say that. But when the money's there, why not use it?" He didn't realize the slip. But I did. On the drive home, the night air sharp in my lungs, I felt a shift inside me. It wasn't just about gathering scraps anymore. I had enough scraps. What I needed now was to let their own words, their own pride, build the case for me. Because paper could be denied, twisted, called fake. But pride always came with witnesses. 1 week later I met with a lawyer. I told him everything in careful order, laying out the binder on his polished desk. His fingers flipped through the pages, his brows rising higher with each turn. "Do you realize what you have here?" he asked finally. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "You've built more than a file. You've built a foundation. Stronger than most people bring to court after years." I nodded, but inside a chill ran through me. It wasn't pride I felt. It was resolve. Because this wasn't about winning a case. It was about exposing a truth that had been smothered under laughter and champagne bubbles. The lawyer tapped the folder. "But you'll need more. Not just paper. Witnesses. Statements. Proof that they knew what they were doing." I thought of Mrs. Carter. I thought of the jeweler. I thought of my brother's careless words. And I smiled. I already have that. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the wind rattle the old window frames, my daughter breathing softly beside me. My mind replayed every word, every brag, every careless smirk my parents had worn. The evidence was no longer just in my binder. It was out there, floating in the world, ready to be caught and brought back to me. And I would catch it. All of it. Days blurred into each other, but each one carried new fuel. At the grocery store, a clerk mentioned my parents' generosity. At the gas station, a man joked about my father's bottomless wallet. Every remark, every casual comment became another brick in the wall I was building. I didn't need to ask. People volunteered their words freely, unaware they were sharpening the blade I would one day use. I started keeping a small notebook in my purse. Not the binder, that stayed hidden. Just a pocket-sized notebook where I jotted down phrases, names, dates. To anyone else it looked like a shopping list. To me it was a map of their downfall. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of orange, I found myself face to face with my father. We stood in the yard of his home, the grass freshly cut, the air thick with the smell of gasoline and pride. He leaned on the fence, surveying the neighborhood like he owned it. "Your brother deserves everything we gave him," he said suddenly without prompting. "He'll carry the family name forward." I kept my face neutral. "And what about me?" He turned his head, his eyes narrowing. "You've had enough. Don't ask for more." Enough. My husband's gift, my daughter's future, drained into a wedding that wasn't mine. And I was told it was enough. I met his gaze and held it, my voice calm. "I don't need more." He smirked, satisfied with what he thought was obedience, and walked back toward the house. But if he had looked closer, he might have seen the way my hands clenched into fists at my sides. He might have noticed the calm wasn't surrender. It was the silence of evidence gathering. The quiet before the strike. By the end of that month, the binder had doubled in size. Not from papers alone, but from voices. Words scribbled down, dates attached, conversations remembered in detail. Pride had turned into evidence, and they had handed it to me themselves. And the best part? They didn't even know it. That thought kept me steady as I walked out of the lawyer's office, the binder pressed tight against my chest like armor. They had handed me the knife with their pride. Now it was only a matter of where I chose to cut first. But cutting in court wasn't enough. I wanted more than a verdict. I wanted the world to see them for what they truly were. Not generous parents, not community leaders, but thieves who had stolen from their own blood. The first opportunity came sooner than I expected. At the grocery store, I heard two women talking near the produce aisle. "Did you see the paper?" one whispered. "The Bennetts made the society page again. Donations to the school fundraiser." Donations. I gripped the cart so tightly my knuckles whitened. That wasn't generosity. That was laundering stolen money into applause. I picked up a head of lettuce, forcing my face to stay calm, but inside my resolve hardened. If they wanted to parade their generosity in public, I'd give the public a different story to whisper about. That night I called a reporter I knew from church. She was young, ambitious, always sniffing around for stories that rattled small-town cages. "There's something you should see," I told her. My voice was steady, even casual. "But you'll want proof before you print it." Her interest sharpened instantly. "What kind of proof?" "The kind that fills a binder," I replied. We met at a diner the next afternoon, the smell of fried onions and coffee thick in the air. I slid the binder across the booth. She opened it, her eyes widening as page after page revealed itself. "This is," she whispered, flipping faster. "Are you saying?" "I'm not saying anything," I cut in softly. "I'm just showing you what they left behind." Her fingers trembled slightly as she closed the binder. "If this is true, it's explosive." "It's true," I said. My tone left no room for doubt. She leaned in, lowering her voice. "You know this will destroy them, don't you?" I met her eyes. "That's the point." When the article appeared a week later, it was small at first, tucked into the local section, just a column titled "Family's Insurance Money Allegedly Misused for Wedding." But in a town like ours, small things grow teeth quickly. At the hardware store, whispers followed me down the aisles. At the post office, heads turned as I walked past. Some faces looked sympathetic. Others looked hungry for gossip. By Sunday service, the whispers had grown into something louder. My father walked down the aisle as usual, but this time the smiles he reached for came slower, stiffer. Mrs. Carter didn't greet him. She shifted away, clutching her hymnal close. A deacon who always shook his hand suddenly busied himself with the bulletin. And for the first time I saw it, a flicker of unease in my father's eyes. The shame didn't stay inside the church. It followed them everywhere. At the diner, where my parents always held court at the corner booth, their usual companions avoided them. Plates clattered louder as waitresses hurried past without lingering. My mother's laugh, once so loud, now rang hollow as no one leaned in to listen. One evening I drove past their house and saw the porch light flicker on and off. My brother stood outside shouting at my father, his voice carrying into the street. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught enough. "You said no one would find out." The sound made me tighten my grip on the steering wheel. That was the music I'd been waiting for. Of course, they didn't come to me directly at first. They went to others. My uncle called, his voice uneasy. "Do you really want to drag this through the mud?" he asked. "They're your parents." I let silence stretch before answering. "They dragged me there first." He sighed. "People are talking." "Good," I said and hung up. The second article hit harder. The reporter had dug deeper, cross-checking my documents with public records. This time the headline read, "Community leaders accused of misusing daughter's insurance for son's lavish wedding." There was no tucking that away in the back pages. It landed on doorsteps across the county, the words bold and merciless. The day it came out, I walked into the pharmacy and felt every eye turn. Some nodded at me, quietly supportive. Others looked away, unwilling to meet my gaze. I didn't care. This wasn't about their sympathy. This was about stripping away the mask my parents wore. It wasn't long before my brother's marriage began to crack. At another family dinner, tense, awkward, with fewer guests than ever, his wife refused to touch her food. She sat stiffly, her bracelet clinking against the plate as she pushed peas around. Finally, she set her fork down and looked straight at my brother. "I didn't sign up for this," she said coldly. "I didn't marry into a scandal." He sputtered, turning red. "It's not." But she stood, her chair scraping back hard against the floor. "Everyone's laughing at us. Do you understand that? Everyone." She walked out, her heels clicking sharp and final against the tile. I watched my brother's face crumple, but I didn't reach for him. He hadn't reached for me when my daughter needed help. My mother tried to salvage her dignity with apologies wrapped in blame. She showed up at my doorstep one evening, her coat buttoned too tightly, her lips trembling beneath lipstick. "You could have come to us," she said, her voice breaking. "We could have worked this out privately." I stood in the doorway, blocking her from stepping inside. "Privately is how you stole it," I said quietly. Her eyes filled, but I didn't soften. She had taught me tears were currency and hers were counterfeit. "People are saying terrible things," she whispered. "Then maybe stop giving them reasons," I replied and closed the door. The pressure mounted. My father, once the loudest man in the room, now walked with his head low. At the gas station, a stranger spat near his shoes. At the diner, he sat alone, the corner booth empty. One night, I found a message slipped under my door. No name, just a single line scrawled in angry handwriting. About time someone exposed them. I tucked it into my binder. Not because I needed it, but because it reminded me, this wasn't just my fight anymore. Their downfall had become a public event. Still, I wasn't satisfied. Shame alone wasn't enough. I gathered copies of the articles, the receipts, the statements, and mailed them anonymously to organizations my parents belonged to. The church board, the charity committee, even the town council. One by one, the doors they had walked through with ease began to close. Invitations stopped. Calls went unanswered. The seats they once held with pride sat empty. And everywhere they went, eyes followed. Not with admiration, but with contempt. The breaking point came at a fundraiser. My parents attended, desperate to prove they still belonged. They dressed in their finest, but the air around them was different. Colder. When my father raised his glass to speak, the room fell into silence. Not respectful silence, a silence heavy with judgment. Someone coughed. A chair scraped. Then a voice from the back called out, sharp as a knife. "Where'd you get the money for this one?" Laughter rippled, quick and cruel. My father froze, his face pale. My mother's hand gripped his arm, her nails digging in, but no words could save him. They left before dessert was served, their pride shattered not by my hand alone, but by the crowd they once ruled. At home that night, I sat in the dark, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, my daughter sleeping peacefully in the next room. The storm I had unleashed was no longer mine to control. It had taken on a life of its own, spreading through every corner of their world. I thought of their faces, pale and humiliated as the laughter rose. And I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Not sorrow. Not rage. Relief. Because breaking them in court would punish their deeds. But breaking them in public? That punished their pride. And for people like them, that was the sharper blade. That's what I felt as I sat in the quiet kitchen, the refrigerator humming softly, the laughter of strangers still echoing in my ears. My parents had walked out of that fundraiser with their pride in tatters, and for the first time in years I could breathe without feeling like the air was stolen from me. But relief wasn't the end. Not yet. Because I didn't build that binder, gather every scrap and hold my silence just to watch them squirm in public. That was only part of it. The final blow was still waiting. The one that would take what they thought belonged to them and give it back to where it should have been all along. To my daughter. To us. The court date arrived on a gray morning. Clouds hung low, heavy, as though the sky itself wanted to witness what was about to unfold. I dressed simply, no glitter, no pearls. Just a navy dress, my husband's wedding band on a chain around my neck, and my daughter's drawing tucked into my purse for strength. The courthouse smelled of paper and old wood. The echo of footsteps on the tiled floor followed me as I walked inside, binder pressed close to my chest. My parents were already there, sitting stiff on the bench outside the courtroom. My mother's lipstick was too bright, painted on like armor. My father's hands shook slightly as he flipped through a folder that looked thin, almost empty compared to mine. He glanced up, eyes narrowing. "You really want to drag us through the dirt?" I met his stare without flinching. "You already did that yourselves." My mother leaned forward, her voice sharp but trembling. "Do you think people will side with you? We raised you. We gave you everything." I kept my voice calm, quiet. "You gave me nothing that wasn't already mine." And with that, the bailiff opened the doors. Inside, the courtroom felt colder, sharper. The judge's gavel cracked and the air seemed to still. My lawyer stood tall beside me, flipping through the binder with practiced ease. When he spoke, his voice was clear, steady. "Your Honor, we intend to prove that Mr. and Mrs. Bennett knowingly diverted insurance funds meant for their granddaughter into personal expenditures, specifically a wedding, jewelry, and luxury items." My parents' lawyer objected, his words stumbling, weak. But the judge waved him down. "Proceed." Page by page, the binder unfolded. Receipts. Withdrawal slips. Jewelry invoices. Mortgage documents. Each one landed like a stone dropped in water, rippling through the room. And then came the witnesses. Mrs. Carter, her voice nervous but firm, recalling how my parents had boasted about paying for the wedding in full. The jeweler, confirming the cash purchase of diamond sets. Even my brother, called reluctantly, admitted under oath that the money was there, so we used it. Every word was another nail in their coffin. But it wasn't just the evidence. It was the silence between. I watched my parents shift in their seats, their faces pale, their shoulders sagging lower with each testimony. The same people who once stood so tall in church pews now looked small, fragile, as the truth stripped them bare. At one point, my mother looked at me, eyes wide with something I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not superiority. Fear. And I didn't look away. When the verdict came, it was simple, clear, final. The judge's voice rang out, firm. The court rules in favor of the plaintiff. Funds misappropriated are to be repaid. Assets seized. Custodial trust established for the benefit of the minor child. I exhaled, the sound shaky but sure. My daughter's future was secure. The money that had been stolen was coming back, piece by piece, through frozen accounts, sold property, garnished wages. My father's face crumpled, his lips pressing tight as though he wanted to shout but had no words left. My mother covered her mouth with trembling hands, mascara streaking down her cheeks. And I sat there calm, silent. Because the storm was over and I had survived it. But it didn't end in the courtroom. The papers picked up the story again, headlines louder this time. Bennett's found guilty of insurance misuse. Funds returned to daughter and grandchild. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. The community that once applauded them now pointed, whispered, and laughed. The mighty had fallen and they had done it to themselves. At the hospital, when I handed over the first payment for my daughter's surgery, the clerk smiled warmly. "It's good to see things working out," she said. I smiled back, tears threatening. It's good to see her safe. Because that was what this had always been about. Not vengeance for its own sake. Not humiliation for pleasure. But protection. Restoration. Making sure my husband's sacrifice wasn't wasted. Weeks later, my parents showed up at my door one last time. They looked older, smaller, dressed in worn coats instead of tailored suits. My father's voice was hoarse. "We lost everything," he said. I studied their faces, the lines carved deeper by shame than by age. For a fleeting second I saw the people they could have been, parents who might have protected instead of stolen. But that was not who they chose to be. My mother whispered, "Are you happy now?" I didn't answer right away. I thought of my daughter sleeping peacefully after her surgery, her chest rising strong and steady. I thought of my husband's promise finally kept. "Yes," I said softly. "For the first time in a long while I am." And I closed the door. Now the house is quiet. The binder still rests beneath the floorboard, though I don't need it anymore. Sometimes I take it out, flip through the pages, not to relive the pain, but to remind myself of what patience and resolve can do. My daughter sits at the kitchen table, crayons spread out, drawing pictures of sunny days and smiling faces. Her laughter fills the air, light and free. I sit beside her, watching my husband's ring warm against my chest. They told me to find a way. And I did. Not their way. Not the easy way. My way. On my terms. If this story touched your heart and kept you hooked, make sure to subscribe for more powerful revenge and betrayal stories. Your support means the world, and I promise the next story will hit just as deep.